It was a humid night in New Orleans, the kind of thick, suffocating humidity that clings to your skin and makes the city streets feel like they're sweating alongside you. In the heart of it all stood the Orleans Parish Jail, its towering concrete walls stretching up towards a moonless sky. To most, it was just another part of the cityscape, a fortress of iron and stone where justice was served and danger was contained. But inside those walls, something was brewing, something dark and deliberate. The clock struck midnight, and the jail settled into its usual rhythm, guards patrolling with heavy footsteps, fluorescent lights flickering lazily in the hallways, and the low murmur of restless inmates echoing through the concrete corridors. But in one corner of the jail, hidden from the watchful eyes of the guards, whispers filled the air. 10 men, each with stories as dark as the night that surrounded them, were planning something unthinkable. Kendall Myles was the youngest of the group, just 19, with eyes that spoke of rage and regret. He had been locked up for murder, his life stripped away before it had barely begun. Beside him stood Moody, a man who wore his scars like badges of honor, each one a testament to the life he'd lived on the edge. Armed robbery, assault, weapons charges, his rap sheet was longer than some men's lifetimes. They were joined by Ken and Dennis, whose face was a tapestry of tattoos and defiance. He had been in and out of the system so many times that the guards knew him by name. And then there were the others, Antoine Massey, Corey Boyd, Derek Groves, Gary Price, Jermaine Donald, Linton Van Buren, and Leo Tate. Each one carried the weight of their crimes, and each one shared the same, unyielding desire for freedom. But freedom from Orleans Parish Jail was a fool's dream. The place was built to hold men like them, to keep the city's worst from clawing their way back to the surface. Yet, as they gathered in hushed conversation, a plan began to take shape, one born not from desperation, but from opportunity. For months, they had watched, studied, and waited. They memorized the guards' routines, noted every shift change, and whispered coded messages during meal times. They knew where the cameras blinked and where the shadows were thick enough to hide in. But their real discovery came from something far more mundane, something almost laughably simple. A toilet. It was Leo Tate who first noticed it. A crack behind the toilet in their cell, barely noticeable but enough to make him curious. At first, it was just idle exploration, a finger tracing the jagged edge of the concrete, feeling for weakness. But as days turned into weeks, that crack became a fissure, and the fissure became a gap. It wasn't long before they realized what they were looking at wasn't just decay, it was an opportunity. With time, patience, and more than a little brute strength, they began to dismantle the fixture, piece by piece. The guards never noticed, distracted by their own routines and the endless noise of the prison. Bit by bit, the toilet came away from the wall, revealing a hidden passage behind it, a narrow maintenance corridor that snaked its way through the jail's innards like a forgotten artery. It was dark, damp, and smelled of rust and rot, but to the 10 men staring into its depths, it looked like salvation. The plan was simple, but it required precision. They couldn't rush, they couldn't afford mistakes. One slip-up, one stray noise, and everything would come crashing down. So, they waited for the perfect moment when the guards were at their most tired, their most distracted. And when that moment came, they moved. One by one, they slipped through the narrow opening, squeezing their bodies through the jagged edges of concrete and into the darkness beyond. It was a tight fit, scraping skin and tearing fabric, but none of them made a sound. Silence was their greatest ally. Through the maintenance corridor, they crept like ghosts, their hearts hammering in their chests as they navigated the forgotten passageways. Ahead of them lay the loading dock, a place they had only seen from the confines of their cells. A place that connected the jail to the outside world. There were guards, of course, but they had timed their escape well. A shift change left the dock unguarded for just 3 minutes, an eternity when planned with precision. But the walls stood before them, towering and crowned with barbed wire, a jagged reminder that freedom was still just out of reach. But they had prepared for this too. Blankets, knotted and twisted into makeshift ropes, were flung over the edge of the wall. With hands blistered and muscles aching, they climbed, scraping skin and tearing flesh, but never once slowing down. When they reached the top, there was no time to think, only to act. The drop to the other side was steep, but adrenaline makes for soft landings. One by one, they leapt, hitting the ground hard and rolling to their feet, eyes scanning the shadows for movement. But there was none. The city lights flickered in the distance, and the hum of cars drifted through the air. Freedom. But this was just the beginning. 10 men were now loose on the streets of New Orleans, men with nothing to lose and everything to gain. The city didn't know it yet, but the hunt had just begun. And as the sun began to rise, Orleans Parish Jail lay silent, unaware that its walls had been breached and its prisoners had fled. It wasn't until 8:30 that morning, 8 full hours later, that the guards realized the unthinkable had happened. 10 men were gone, and no one had seen them leave. Panic is a peculiar thing. It starts as a whisper, an itch at the back of the mind that something isn't right. Then it spreads, quick and unyielding, consuming logic and leaving only chaos in its wake. That was exactly what happened at the Orleans Parish Jail at 8:30 a.m. on the morning of May 16, 2025. It began with a routine head count, the kind done 1,000 times before without incident. The guards moved with casual indifference, tapping batons against cell bars and scribbling notes on their clipboards. Cell after cell, face after face. Everything seemed as it should be. Until they reached Block D. The guard, a burly man with a thick New Orleans drawl, stopped in his tracks, eyes narrowing as he scanned the rows of bunk beds. He counted silently, lips moving as his finger traced the faces he saw. He counted again. And again. A bead of sweat traced down his temple, and he thumbed the radio on his shoulder. "Control, I'm missing some heads down here." His voice crackled over the speakers. "Repeat that," the voice on the other end asked, annoyance evident. I'm missing 10. Silence hung in the air like the stillness before a storm. "What do you mean 10? The guard's eyes scanned the empty bunks, his pulse hammering in his ears. "I mean 10. 10 damn inmates. They're gone." And just like that, the whisper of panic became a roar. The sirens screamed to life, blaring through the concrete halls and rattling the metal doors of each cell. Guards erupted into motion, their boots thundering against the floors as shouts filled the air. Inmates pressed their faces against the bars, eyes wide with curiosity and something else, hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, the impossible had been done. Within minutes, the warden was called, his morning coffee abandoned as he rushed to his office, tie flapping against his chest. Papers were scattered across his desk, each one demanding answers he didn't have. His phone buzzed relentlessly, media outlets, city officials, the mayor himself. They all wanted the same thing, an explanation. "How in the hell did 10 inmates get out of my prison without anyone noticing?" he shouted, slamming his fist against his desk. His face was red, beads of sweat dotting his brow. The head of security, a grizzled veteran with eyes that had seen too much, shook his head slowly. "It wasn't just a hole, sir. They took out the whole damn toilet. Used the maintenance corridor. Must have been planning it for weeks." The warden stared at him, mouth agape. "And nobody saw this?" "No, sir." "Nobody heard this?" "No, sir." A long silence hung in the room, thick with disbelief. The warden finally sank into his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "So where the hell are they now?" Meanwhile, outside the towering concrete walls of the jail, the city of New Orleans awoke to the news with a collective gasp. It was plastered across television screens, splashed across newspapers, and blared from car radios. 10 men, murderers, thieves, armed robbers, were out there, somewhere in the city, free and desperate. Crime Stoppers hotlines lit up within hours. People called in from every corner of the city, some with genuine concern, others just looking for a slice of the $5,000 reward promised for information leading to a capture. They were running down Canal Street. One woman shouted into her phone. "I saw them with my own eyes. All 10 of them. I swear I saw 2 of them in the Bywater district, wearing orange jumpsuits," another caller declared. The police followed up on every tip, sirens screaming through the streets as they scanned alleys and raided abandoned buildings. But each time, they came up empty. It was as if the earth had swallowed them whole. For the escapees, freedom was a jolt of adrenaline, a high unlike anything they had ever felt. But adrenaline fades, and reality seeps in. They had split up as soon as they hit the city limits, each man scattering to the wind with nothing but the clothes on his back and the knowledge that every cop in New Orleans was looking for him. Kendall Myles found himself holed up beneath a bridge just outside of the French Quarter. The sounds of traffic roared above him, but it was the silence below that comforted him. He pulled his knees to his chest, eyes scanning the shadows, waiting. Always waiting. Robert Moody was smarter, or at least he thought he was. He kept moving, never staying in one place for too long. Alley to alley, street to street, he weaved through the city like smoke, slipping through the cracks where people rarely looked. But even the smartest can't run forever. It was at a seedy motel on the outskirts of the city where Moody finally slipped. He had been hiding under a car in the parking garage, his breath shallow, his hands shaking. He didn't hear the footsteps approaching, didn't see the shadow stretching across the pavement. By the time he turned, it was too late. "Don't move," a voice shouted. Red and blue lights flashed, illuminating the darkness with bursts of violent color. Moody raised his hands slowly, his eyes filled with something between rage and resignation. They dragged him away in cuffs, the first of the 10 to be captured. But the hunt was far from over. Back at the jail, the warden watched the news reports with steely eyes. "1 down, 9 to go," he muttered. His phone rang for what felt like the 100th time that day. It was the mayor. He picked up on the first ring. "Tell me you found the rest," the mayor demanded. His voice was sharp, cutting through the static of the line. "Not yet," the warden replied, jaw clenched. "But we will. You better. This city can't sleep with 9 killers running free." The warden hung up without a word, his gaze fixed on the flickering screen in front of him. Outside, New Orleans buzzed with tension, every shadow a potential hiding spot, every stranger a threat. The city held its breath, waiting for the next move. 9 men were still out there, armed with desperation and the taste of freedom. The police were closing in. But the escapees knew the city better than most. They had lived in its underbelly, navigated its darkest corners. And they weren't going back. Not without a fight. New Orleans was a city on edge. Word of the jailbreak had spread like wildfire. 10 men, all charged with crimes that stained the very soul of the city, were now out there, roaming free. As police cruisers prowled the streets and helicopters buzzed overhead, neighborhoods fell silent, doors locked early, and lights flickered off behind drawn curtains. The hunt was on, and it was only a matter of time before blood would be spilled, one way or another. Kendall Myles had always been good at hiding. At 19, he had grown up in the city's shadows, learning early on how to blend into the background, how to disappear when eyes lingered too long. After the escape, he kept moving, always just a step ahead of the searchlights and sirens. He knew where the blind spots were, the cracks in the city's facade. But fear has a way of unraveling even the best laid plans. On the 3rd night of his newfound freedom, Kendall slipped. He had taken refuge in an old warehouse along Chapatula Street, its windows shattered and walls graffitied with ghosts of rebellion. He was hungry, desperate, and the flickering light of a nearby convenience store called to him like a beacon. He couldn't help himself. He moved quickly, eyes darting from shadow to shadow as he slipped inside. The bell above the door jingled, and the clerk, a wiry man with tired eyes, looked up, barely interested. Kendall grabbed a bag of chips, a bottle of water, and a candy bar. He was almost out the door when he saw it. His own face, plastered across the television behind the counter. His mugshot glaring back at him, bold letters screaming escape beneath it. His hands went clammy. He froze. The clerk looked up again, his eyes flicking from the screen to Kendall and back again. Recognition flashed across his face like lightning. Hey, ain't that you?" Kendall didn't respond. He ran. Meanwhile, the police were closing in on another fugitive. Ken and Dennis had always been the bold one, brash and unyielding. His escape wasn't quiet. Unlike the others, Dennis had taken to the streets, reveling in his stolen freedom. He moved loudly, crashing through abandoned buildings and running with old friends who should have known better. His arrogance cost him. A tip came in late one night from a woman in the lower Ninth Ward. "He's staying with his cousin," she whispered over the phone. "2 blocks from the bridge. He's there right now." Police moved swiftly, surrounding the dilapidated house with precision. Lights were cut, radios silenced. They came in from all sides, kicking in doors and storming the building with shields raised. Dennis tried to run, crashing through a back window, shards of glass slicing his arms. He stumbled into the backyard, panting, eyes wild. He made it 3 blocks before they cornered him in an alley, the beam of a flashlight blinding him. "Get on the ground," a voice shouted. Dennis didn't listen. He charged. They stopped him with a single shot to the leg, his body crumpling to the pavement. The city took a breath. Another one down. But 7 still roamed the night. For every one they captured, 2 more seemed to slip through the cracks. Antoine Massey and Corey Boyd were seen near the industrial canal, ducking into warehouses and slipping through gates like shadows. Police flooded the area, setting up roadblocks and deploying K-9 units, but they were always one step behind. Each time they got close, Massey and Boyd vanished, as if the city itself conspired to keep them hidden. The mayor stood at the podium, cameras flashing as he gripped the edges with white-knuckled hands. His voice was strained, stretched thin from sleepless nights and mounting pressure. "We will find them. Every last one of them. I promise you that." His words were strong, but his eyes betrayed him. Fear was seeping in, and the city could smell it. To fuel the hunt, the FBI increased the reward, $5,000 for each fugitive. Posters with their faces lined every corner, plastered across light posts, pinned to community boards. Even the children knew their names now, whispered in playgrounds like legends of monsters lurking in the dark. It wasn't long before the next capture came. Gary Price, exhausted and gaunt, was found hiding in a drainage tunnel beneath the city. He was hungry, barely conscious, clutching a stolen loaf of bread like it was the last thing tethering him to life. The officers approached cautiously, their voices soft and unthreatening. Price didn't resist. He simply looked up, eyes hollow, and whispered, "I'm done." But for the remaining 6, surrender was not an option. Leo Tate and Lenton Van Buren had made it as far as Baton Rouge. Together, they pooled what little resources they had, stealing cars and pilfering supplies from gas stations along the way. Their plan was simple: get out of Louisiana, disappear into the vastness of the South, where the streets were less watchful and the lights didn't burn so bright. But paranoia is a vicious beast. It crept into their minds, turning shadows into threats, footsteps into pursuers. On the 5th day of their escape, they were spotted in a roadside diner, their faces unmistakable. A waitress recognized them from the news, her hands shaking as she poured their coffee. She slipped into the back and dialed the police. When the officers arrived, Tate and Van Buren were still at the counter, finishing their meals. There was no chase, no struggle. Just the slow shuffle of handcuffs clicking shut, and the whispered thanks of a waitress who collected her $10,000 reward the very next day. Only 4 remained: Antoine Massey, Corey Boyd, Jermaine Donald, and Derek Groves. 4 men whose faces had become legends in the city. The search was relentless, every shadow combed, every whisper investigated. The net was tightening, and they knew it. But something was different now. The ones that remained were the smartest, the most elusive. For days, then weeks, they disappeared entirely. Not a single sighting, not a whisper of movement. The city grew restless. Had they escaped the city? Were they lurking just out of sight, waiting for the hunt to fade? No one knew. Not yet. But Orleans Parish Jail was no longer just a place of confinement, it was a symbol. A reminder that even the strongest walls can be broken, and that sometimes, the shadows are not as empty as they seem.